Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time I've got a question that kind of goes along with many questions or comments I've been seeing about Skeleton Crew thus far, and so my response will maybe go a bit beyond the question, but it comes to us from LOL I Am Not, who asked, "Hey Thor, do you think Skeleton Crew would be more enjoyable for adults if they got to watch it with an 8 to 12-year-old? I'm excited to watch this with my nephews once they get a little older." And first of all, I think Skeleton Crew, and I say this after only 2 episodes, so who knows what the future of the show holds, but I think it can be rather enjoyable for adults to watch all by themselves. My personal biggest issue with it, if anyone watching this now didn't watch my initial review, it wasn't so much that it was bad or that I didn't enjoy it or that it was too childish or anything quite like that. And I mean, yes, it did seem to be focused on or aimed at a younger audience or at kids in the age bracket you mentioned. But I think my biggest issue with it is that it leans maybe a little too heavily into other things or trying to mimic or replicate other things rather than just focusing on being Star Wars. Not that Star Wars can't do something a little different, but the suburbia kind of took me out of it a bit. Not saying there are no suburbs in Star Wars, but it was so Earth-like that it was a little off-putting, for me at least. You can disagree, and I would have preferred a little more of an alien environment, that's all. But either way, to answer your question, yeah, I think this would be a very enjoyable thing to watch with your kids or your nephews or nieces or whatever it might be, and to watch them, hopefully, and likely, I think, enjoy this, to watch them maybe take their first steps into a larger galaxy, the larger galaxy of Star Wars, and to start to become fans of it, to be a gateway into other parts of Star Wars for them or other content. And that's no doubt exactly what Disney and Lucasfilm are hoping for out of this show, and why it does go so out of its way to make the younger characters feel so relatable to kids these days, or to kids from the 80s at least. I don't know that kids these days have the exact same kind of life these kids do. But anyway, I saw a few comments from my review and elsewhere now on social media that said something just like this, that their kids were instantly hooked on it and were asking questions, and that's awesome. I think Star Wars in the Disney era, and it's kind of ironic because when you think Disney, you pretty much think children's entertainment, but I think it's had a really, really hard time reaching younger viewers, in no small part because there is so much aimed at them these days, or so many options for them to entertain themselves with. Everything from video games to social media influencers are vying for your kids' attentions, and they have all of this and much, much more quite literally at their fingertips and can move on to the next thing with a simple swipe of the finger. So not only getting their attention, but keeping it and turning them into a fan of something is not so easy when there is just so much, and when kids tend to be, maybe a little scatterbrained at times. And so I'm going to be very, very interested to continue to hear from people in the comments or on social media about how their kids are feeling about it, and if they keep watching it and getting more and more into Star Wars in general because of it. I also want to see in due time what the ratings for the show look like. Will there be an influx of young viewers as well as older ones to boost the ratings enough for Lucasfilm and Disney to want to do more like this in the future? Will the potential success of this show say to them that, a show like this on the more fun side and aimed pretty much or primarily at younger viewers, it can work and bring in the numbers and help make another generation of Star Wars fans, which I'm not so sure the sequel trilogy did. And what'll also be very interesting, and what will no doubt guide, to some degree, maybe a large one, the future of the whole Star Wars franchise, is the eventual numbers for something like Andor Season 2. And to compare them to Season 1 after what I would argue has been extremely positive word of mouth since the first season debuted. Andor sort of has a cult following within the fandom, or you'll see people say, "I've given up on everything else Star Wars but Andor," that they'll watch Season 2 and then they're out. And so if, hypothetically here, but if Skeleton Crew doesn't pull in the numbers, and I'm not trying to be negative or pessimistic here, I enjoyed the first 2 episodes for the most part, especially when I keep in mind what they're trying to be. This isn't trying to be Andor or anything like it. It is trying to be its own thing, aimed at a different audience, and I'm 100% fine with that. But if the numbers for this show aren't there, and Andor Season 2 sees a significant increase over the first season, and mind you, the first season numbers for Andor, they weren't fantastic. They weren't the worst Disney Plus live-action Star Wars show, according to the numbers. That was The Acolyte. But they weren't anywhere near the top either. They weren't up there with, say, Mandalorian Season 1 and 2. But if they do see a significant improvement, if it does, much like the first season, also see immense praise from the critics, what approach does Disney and Lucasfilm take with Star Wars going forward? How do they handle what many think of, right or wrong, as a kids franchise if the show aimed squarely at kids is not successful, while the one aimed squarely at adults is very successful and sees an increase in interest over time? And no, by no means am I suggesting if that scenario plays out, and it might not. Skeleton Crew could end up being a huge success for all we know and have big ratings, while Andor Season 2, I suppose, could be a failure, and I dread that thought. But if that scenario plays out, I'm not suggesting Star Wars give up on kids and become a purely adult-focused franchise or anything like that. I want to see a new generation of Star Wars fans come about because they have quality shows and or movies to enjoy. But if Skeleton Crew fails and Andor Season 2 succeeds, would it encourage them to do more like Andor going forward? To, shall we say, lean away from the fun and instead take Star Wars a bit more seriously? And to that you might say, and I wouldn't entirely disagree with you, but you might say that wouldn't be Star Wars anymore then, that it's supposed to be on the fun side and aimed a bit more towards kids. George Lucas himself even said he made the first movie for 12-year-old boys. But as I've pointed out before, what is often considered the very best Star Wars anything, anywhere, ever, is The Empire Strikes Back. And that is, along with Revenge of the Sith, which is also a lot of people's favorite or what they think of as the best, but they are the most gritty and most adult of the Star Wars films. There's not a lot of fun in those two films for kids, especially Revenge of the Sith. Not to mention, what many people or fans think of as the best Star Wars in the Disney era are things like Rogue One and Andor, things that again are more adult in nature. And once more, I'm not saying by any stretch that they should give up on the younger audiences. I do like the idea of Star Wars being an all-ages thing, but perhaps it's time to stop and consider the fact that the vast, vast majority of Star Wars fans today are adults. They are the ones who grew up with the previous generations or trilogies. And though, yeah, they want to introduce it to their kids, they might very much appreciate something like Skeleton Crew, they also might very much appreciate something like Andor, or more of something like Andor. And when I say like Andor, I don't necessarily mean a show that focuses on the Empire versus Rebellion, or that doesn't have any Force users in it. I'm simply saying the tone and that level of sophistication in the writing, I suppose, is the best way to put it. But anyway, my point here is that there is room for all different types of content, for all different types of ages in Star Wars, but not everything needs to be specifically for all ages. We can absolutely have things like Skeleton Crew aimed at the younger audience, and that adults, I think, can and potentially will, or hopefully will, get some enjoyment out of. We are, again, only 2 episodes in, so who knows what happens with this show. But there is also room for things that maybe don't appeal to kids at all in Star Wars. Things like Andor, that appeal far more to adults. Let's sort of redefine what Star Wars is for all ages actually means. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn. Take to the comments below and tell me what you think about anything and everything I had to say here. Do you agree that Star Wars should kind of maybe abandon this idea that its content needs to be for everyone and make specific content for different crowds? Not that it hasn't done that before, but maybe really fully embrace that idea. Or you can ask a question for a future lightning response video. But whatever you choose to do, leave a comment below. Let's talk some Star Wars, and until next time, thanks for watching.